The wide aperture of 1.8 makes the bokeh really buttery and just awesome. As you can see here, it's pretty nice. And
you took a picture of the dog?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's good, Michael.
So today is a very nice day, and we went out to take a walk. We got some pastry, and it's like 9 p.m. It's sunsetting like now. I mean, it started to sunset, and so I'm gonna enjoy the sunset. So I guess I'm gonna talk about the filters with the 50mm 1.8, what we need them, if we really need them, if we want a better shallow depth of field when there's so much light outside. So, but I'm gonna do that after the intro. What's up guys, Dan Frullani here, and welcome back to another video. If you're new to this channel, consider subscribing, and since you're there, just hit the like button. Alright, so today we start immediately talking about this topic, which is the Canon 50mm 1.8 with ND filters. In this case, I'm using the newer. Anyway, this is a very budget-friendly brand, and it's actually one of my favorites for the proportion price-quality. You can see the links in the description if you want to check out the prices and availability. Here inside I have 3 different ND filters, different intensity. ND2, which is very mild, ND4, ND8. I know some of you might say variable ND filters are better because you need to switch them when you're shooting, trying to find the right one for the shot to get the correct exposure. Yeah, that's true, but they tend to be pretty expensive, especially the very good ones, and I recommend for this Polar Pro. They're awesome, but if you want to save money, it's very difficult to find variable ND filters that actually work or that come without problems. And that is why in this video I want to talk about these ND filters with the 50mm 1.8. So what is an ND filter? Basically sunglasses for your lens. Let me explain a little bit to make you understand. If you haven't watched my video about camera basics, feel free to check it out, so you might be able to understand everything better, or at least a little bit better. So basically, when we're shooting a video, we control the aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. However, unlike photography, that we can play around with all these 3 elements, for video, we can't really change the shutter speed. Because for example, if we're shooting 24 frames per second, shutter speed should be 1/50th of a second. So we can't just lower it down to let more light in, and we can't set it faster to let less light in. Otherwise, the motion in the video will start looking weird. That would not be the standard shutter speed for cinematic video, or with the natural motion blur and everything. So when we don't have enough light, for example, we open the aperture all the way. If our lens is a fast lens, no problem at all. And still, if we don't have enough light, we can bump up the ISO, 400, 600, 800, 1000, 3200, whatever, as long as we don't get grain in the footage. But when we have too much light, what do? Provided that we cannot change the shutter speed and the ISO is already the basic 100, well, that's when we need ND filters. As I always say in a very simple way, and maybe inaccurate, but that gives you the idea. It's like sunglasses for your lens. They reduce the amount of light passing through the lens hitting the sensor. The footage would look darker without affecting the depth of field, because we're not going to change the aperture, we're not going to change the shutter speed. When we don't use an ND filter and we just change the aperture to f8, f12, f16, Sometimes f22 is not even enough and we have too much light, but provided that we can expose the footage correctly at f16, f22, well, chances are we don't get any blur in the background, we don't get the shallow depth of field at all. Well, in the case of the Nifty 50, because of its field of view and compression, we tend to almost always get some blurry background. Even at f8, for example, we get a really nice shallow depth of field if there is enough distance between the subject and the background or the subject and the foreground. But in my opinion, the advantage of using the wide aperture of 1.8 makes the bokeh really buttery and just awesome. When it comes to ND filters, as I said, depending on the intensity of the filter, or the amount of light that it blocks, we are able to adjust the aperture to keep it open as much as possible. Sometimes I use an ND8, and with the Nifty 50, when I go to 3.5 or 2.8, something in between, the footage looks good. I mean, it's not bad at all, but still, it could be better. What I usually do when I don't have variable ND filters available this size, I just use two. Like in this case, I have the ND2, ND4, and ND8. When there's so much light and I want to make sure I get the most buttery shallow depth of field, first I try with the ND8. Most of the times I can't go any lower than f2.8. I just take the ND4 and I put it over it together. So that'd be an ND12. I believe it doesn't compromise the quality of the footage of the image, and when I use it, I'm able to set the aperture to 1.8. I believe it looks much better. Of course, definitely much better than when I don't use ND filters and I just set the aperture to f8, where yes, as I said, I get the shallow depth of field with the 50mm if there is enough distance between the subject and the background, but there is so much difference when I use ND filters and I set the aperture all the way to 1.8. Again, these are very budget-friendly ND filters. My favorite are the Polar Pro Peter McKinnon edition, but I understand, I get it, they're expensive. So in my experience, you can find affordable ND filters that get the job done, that they don't really compromise the quality of the footage, at least not much. But as I said earlier, for variable ND filters, it's really difficult. They're so expensive, and it's really difficult to find budget-friendly ones that actually work. One of the most common issue with cheap variable ND filters, and sometimes not even the very cheap ones, is that when you try to adjust the intensity of the filter, you end up getting a black cross in the middle of the image, which is not a good thing. So if you have any recommendation, if you know of any affordable variable ND filters, feel free to tell me in the comment section down below. But in the meantime, for the Nifty 50, I keep using these newer filters, which do the job. Very affordable. Again, check the links in the description if you want to see availability and prices. Alright, I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, smash the like button, subscribe if you aren't already, and I will see you guys in the next video.